Alright, so this video we're going to look at finding the inverse of a 3 by 3 matrix. So this video is probably going to be pretty long. So it takes a little bit of work to do it. It's not tough, it's just kind of tedious. But here we have a 3 by 3 matrix and we want to find the inverse. So what we have to do is take the matrix, the 1, 2, -1, 3, 5, -2, and this is a -1. I don't know if you can tell that's a negative, but that's -1, 4, and 3. And then what we do is we draw a line down here, and next to it we write the identity matrix for a 3 by 3. And the identity matrix is, well, I'll show you. Let's see. All right, so here's the identity matrix. It's a 3 by 3 and it's ones on the main diagonal and it's zeros everywhere else. Now, what we have to do is we have to do row operations. Okay? So the row operations, it means you can interchange any two rows. You can multiply each element of a row by a non-zero constant, and you can replace a row by the sum of itself and a constant multiple of another row of the matrix. So we could multiply a row by something, add it to another row, and replace that row with the sum of that. All right, so what we want to do is we want to reduce this matrix to the identity matrix. Okay, and whatever row operations we do on this as we go down, we have to do the same row operations to this one. And eventually, what we'll do is we'll get to the identity matrix here, and then we'll end up with another matrix over here with, whatever numbers they come out to be, and this matrix over here will be your inverse. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's draw us a line here. All right, so you can see I want to get zeros here, and I need to get zeros here, and then the main diagonal needs to be ones. Well, I'm going to worry about the diagonal, the very last step, for it to be ones. I'm going to concentrate on getting zeros. Well, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get this one to go to 0. Okay? So you can see that if I add row 1 and I add row 3 together, 1 plus -1 is 0. So what I'll do is I'll add row 1 and I'll add row 3 to add row 1 and row 3, and I'll replace row 3 with that result, and that'll give me a 0 here. Alright, so let's write down what we're going to do. So I'm going to do row 1 plus row 3, and then I just like to write the row I'm replacing down here. I'm going to replace row 3 with this sum here. Alright, so row 3 is the row that I'm replacing. That is the only row that's going to change. So what I'm going to do is write the other two rows down. Alright, so here we go. We've got 1 plus -1 is 0. We've got 2 plus 4 is 6. And we've got -1 plus 3 is 2. Okay? Alright, now we perform the row operations on this. Now we have to perform the same row operations on this, on the identity matrix. So I'm replacing row 3. So I'm going to write the other two rows down. And so now I'm going to do row 1 plus row 3. So 1 plus 0 is 1. 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. All right. So now what I have to do is either get this one to go to 0 or this one to go to 0. But look at this. To get this one to go to 0, I would have to multiply row 1 by -3, because that -3 times 2 is -6, and -6 plus 6 would give me 0. But look what happens here. 3 times 1 is what? 3, and 3 plus 0 is 3. So I would lose this 0. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to get this 3 here to go to 0. So what do I have to do that? Well, if I do -3 times row 1 plus row 2. See, this is all I'm looking at right now because I want this to go to 0. Well, look at this. -3 times 1 is -3, and -3 plus 3 is 0. Okay? So I'm replacing row 2 with this result here. All right. So I'm replacing row 2. So let's write the other two rows down. And then I've got 0, 6, 2. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to multiply this out. Okay, so I'm going to multiply -3 to each one of these. So that's going to be -3 times 1 is -3. -3 times 2 is -6. Okay. And then -3 times -1 is +3. All right. So that's row 1 multiplied by -3. And then I'm going to write row 2 down. 3, 5, -2. And if I add them, I get what? 0, -1, 1. And see, that's what this is. 0, -1, and 1. All right. So I just showed you that so you could see the work. From now on, I'll do this step in my head. Okay. All right. But I'll talk you through it though. All right. So let's look at this. I'm replacing row 2. So I'm going to write the other two rows down. All right. So here we go. -3 times 1 is -3, plus the element in row 2. So -3 times 1 is -3, plus 0 is -3. And then -3 times 0 plus 1 is 1. See, -3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. And then -3 times 0 is 0. And 0 plus 0 is 0. Right? And so draw our line. All right. So now I'm going to get this 6 here to go to 0. Well, what do I have to do to do that? Well, I can use this row because look, I've got a 0 here and a 0 here. So when I add those two, that's going to give me 0. Even though, can you think of what we have to multiply to row 2 to get a 0 in this spot? It's 6, right? 6 times -1 is -6, and -6 plus 6 is 0. Okay, so I've got to multiply each of these elements by 6. Well, look at this. 6 times 0 is 0, and then 0 plus 0 is 0. So I still keep that 0. Okay? All right, let me bring this, down some more. All right, I told you it's a long problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 6 times row 2 plus row 3, and I'm going to replace row 3. All right, so I'm replacing row 3. So let's write the first two rows down. So that's 1, 2, -1, 0, -1, 1. All right, so here we go. 6 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. 6 times -1 is -6. -6 plus 6 is 0. And then 6 times 1 is 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. All right. Now, let's do the same thing to this. So I'm going to write the first two rows down because I'm replacing row 3. So that's 1, 0, 0, -3, 1, 0. All right, so 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. Negative 18 plus 1 is negative 17. And then 6 times 1 is 6. 6 plus 0 is 6. And then 6 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. All right. And hopefully I'm not making a mistake somewhere. A careless arithmetic mistake. So, but the main thing is that you get the process. And what I would do, you see how when I do the row operations, if I were you, I would do it twice to make sure you got the same thing back. Because you miss one little sign somewhere, the whole thing's going to be wrong, even though you're doing the procedure right. All right, so look at this. I've got all of these to go to 0. Okay, but now what do I have to do? I need to get these to go to 0. Okay, so, well, here we go. Well, the first thing we can do, well, we can get, uh, well, we could get this to go to 0 using this. Okay, all right. So let's see what that does. That's just going to be what, row 1 plus row 2. So row 1 plus row 2, and I'm going to replace row 1 because I want my 0 here. Okay. All right, so I'm replacing row 1, so let's write the other two rows down. All right, so let's just add the two rows. 1 plus 0 is 1. 2 plus negative 1 is 1. And negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So we'll do the same thing here. So I'll write the second and third row down. So that's negative 3, 1, 0, negative 17, 6, and 1. All right, so let's add row 1 and row 2. 1 plus negative 3 is negative 2. 0 plus 1 is 1. And 0 plus 0 is 0. All right. Now let's draw our line. Let me extend this down some more. All right. So now let's see. Well, look, I could do row 1 plus row 2 and replace it to get the 0 here, but what happens? I would lose this 0 because 0 plus 1 is 1. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and get this one to go to 0 using this row. Okay, so I am going to have to do, let's see, negative 8 times row 2 plus row 3 and replace row 2. See, if I multiply this by negative 8, that's going to give me negative 8 times 1 is negative 8. Negative 8 plus 8 is 0. Okay. All right, so I'm replacing row 2. So let's write the first row and the third row down. All right, so let's see. All right, so we've got negative 8 times 0 is 0. Plus 0 is 0. Negative 8 times negative 1 is positive 8. 8 plus 0 is 8. And then negative 8 times 1 is negative 8. Negative 8 plus 8 is 0. All right. So now we need to get this to go to 0. Okay, so now let's perform the row operations on this. So I'm replacing row 2. So I'm going to write the other two rows down. So that's going to be negative 2, 1, 0, negative 17, 6, and 1. So I have negative 8 times negative 3 is 24. 24 plus negative 17 is 7. And then I have negative, negative 8 times 1 is negative 8. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2. And then negative 8 times 0 is 0. And 0 plus 1 is 1. All right, so actually we're almost there. Just bear with me. Now I got to get this to go to 0. So I'm going to use this row and this row. Okay. See, there's no way to get this 1 to go to 0 using this row because there's nothing I can multiply to 0 to get -1. Okay. And even if there was, this, because of the 8, I would lose that 0. So I have to use row 2. So to do that, I'm going to do what? -8 times row 1 plus row 2. Because see, that's going to give me a -8 there. The -8 times 1, -8 plus 8 is 0. All right. So, and I'm replacing row 1, so I'll write that down here. All right, so I'm replacing row 1. So let's write these two rows down. All right. So now I have -8 times 1 is -8. -8 plus 0 is -8. -8 times 1 is -8. -8 plus 8 is 0. And then I have -8 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus 0 is 0. So I got all my zeros. Well, first let's go ahead and do the operations here. So I'm replacing row 1, so I've got 7, -2, 1, -17, 6, 1. So let's do the row operations. So -8 times -2 is 16. 16 plus 7 is 23. -8 times 1 is -8. -8 plus -2 is -10. -8 times 0 is 0. And 0 plus 1 is 1. Alright, so we just about got it. We got one more step. Alright, now remember I said these have to be 1s. Well, let's get this to go to 1. How can I do that? Well, I can do -1/8 times row 1. And what does that do? Well, that gets this to go to 1. And when I multiply the -1/8 times row 1, I'm going to also replace row 1 with whatever that is. Okay, so -1/8 times -8 is 1. That times 0 is 0. Let me change colors. So 1, 0, and then -1/8 times 0 is 0. But then I have to do the same thing to this. So that's going to give me 23. Well, that's going to give me -23 over 8. Okay. And then here I've got what? -10 over 8 over negative, and a negative is a positive. So that's 10 over 8. And 10 over 8, 2 goes into both of them. So that would be what? 5/2. And then -1/8 times 1 is -1/8. Okay. And then look, I can do the same thing to row 2. I can do 1/8 times row 2 and replace row 2 with that result. So 1/8 times 0 is 0. 1/8 times 8 is 1, and 1/8 times 0 is 0. And then I do the same thing here. So 7 times 1/8, that's 7 over 8. -2 times 1/8, that's -2 over 8. But if I reduce 2 over 8, that's what? 1/4. And then 1/8 times 1 is 1/8. And then we can do the same thing with row 3. I can multiply 1/8 times row 3 and replace row 3. That'll give me a 1 there. So that's going to be 0, 0, and a 1. And then all of these get multiplied by 1/8. So -17 times 1/8 is -17 over 8. 6 times 1/8 is 6 over 8. Well, that reduces, right? 2 goes into both of them. So that would reduce to 3/4. And then 1/8 times 1 is 1/8. And so I've reduced it to the identity matrix. And so this matrix here is my inverse. So my inverse is negative 23 over 8, 5 halves, negative 1/8, 7/8, negative 1/4, 1/8, negative 17 over 8, 3/4, and 1/8. Okay. And there's my inverse. Now remember, you can check it. You can take this matrix and multiply it to this matrix, and do you remember what you should get? If you multiply matrix A times the inverse, you should get the identity matrix, which is this. You should get the identity matrix. So I know it's a long problem, it's a lot of work. I have a video for a 2 by 2 matrix. You can check that out. It's shorter. It's using the formula. So hopefully it helped. Check out my other videos. Give me a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.